Right, so as you can see from the top of the page then, we're looking at aims of sentencing. Before we actually decide what sort of sentence to give an offender, there's a lot of aims that we need to take into account within our justice system. So take note at the top of the page then, it's the Criminal Justice Act that contains the 4 aims of sentencing that we currently have. You need to make sure you include that if you want to get into level 4. Right, so all 4 aims must be discussed in depth as well, not just a very brief mention. You've got to go into depth on what each aim is actually involving. Okay, so if we start with punishment then, clearly a major aim of our society is to punish those who do wrongdoing. Okay, so when we punish offenders, there's 2 different ways that we can actually do this. So we can have the aim of retribution in our minds, or we can have the aim of denunciation. So these 2 here form part of the aim of punishment, okay? Right, so retribution is punishing the offender for the act that he has committed, and it's where we are seeking revenge upon that particular person. It's known as giving your just desert, so you're getting what you deserve basically, and it's known as an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So it's in proportion to the crime. So if you think a bit like a jigsaw, the pieces fit together how they're meant to fit together there. What your punishment you get is commensurate to the actual crime that you have committed. Retribution normally applies to serious crimes, things like murder, so then we give an automatic life sentence, because that punishment obviously fits the crime. Now, in terms of what it says here, it's based upon the tariff. Every sentence has a minimum and a maximum tariff. So like murder carries your mandatory life tariff. Robbery, you've got your minimum and maximum tariff as well, maximum being life. So basically every sentence has a tariff, so we need to make sure that whatever we sentence you fits within that. Okay, so for example, theft is 7 years, so your punishment would need to be within the 7-year bracket. We couldn't just suddenly turn around and say 10 years, because that isn't within the tariff of that sentence. It's got to be proportionate. Okay, the jigsaw piece has to fit. Whereas if we have denunciation is where society is expressing their disapproval of the crime. So we don't like that particular crime as a society. So if you want to fill in where you've got your example here, just things like pornography, for example, child pornography. We don't like things like that, and anything involving children, and when people are in prison they get attacked because of it. So it's just showing you that society is condemning that particular crime. So how does society condemn it then? Well, actually, the way that they sentence you is disproportionate to the crime. So the sentence that you receive is harsher. So going back to the jigsaw example, with retribution, the jigsaw pieces fit together perfectly. For denunciation, they don't. So it's like you having a little jigsaw piece and trying to fit a big jigsaw piece from a kid's jigsaw in there. It does not work, because the punishment you receive is far harsher, which some people might argue that that's unfair, because then the defendant's kind of been used as an example. But bear in mind, the aim of the game is to try and stop that crime happening again in the future. So if it means making an example of you, but it working, then that's our overall aim. Okay? So, where it says underneath there, what's the difference between retribution and denunciation? All you're writing in there is the fact that retribution, your punishment is fitting your crime, whereas denunciation, the punishment that you receive is harsher than the crime that you've committed. Okay? Right, second aim then, reduction of crime. Now, this is quite a big aim, really. So, when judges are thinking about this, in their head they're trying to think of ways as much as possible to try to reduce crime. Now, in essence, that's always going to be the overall aim, but we've got to take other things into consideration as well, which is why punishment could sometimes be quite a big aim. In terms of reducing crime, then, we're trying to prevent future crime from occurring. So we do this via deterrence or via rehabilitation. So deterrence involves us trying to deter you from committing that particular crime again, but it's whether we deter you from committing that crime again, or whether we deter society from committing that crime again. It just depends on what the main goal is, really. If we're just trying to put you off, we'll give you what we call a short, sharp shock. Okay? So we're either threatening you that you're going to get a harsh sentence, or we will actually give you a harsh sentence. And the whole aim of that is to make sure that you're not going to commit the crime again. So for example, with me, if I got caught speeding and they said, right, you do it again, we're automatically going to give you 2 years in prison. So that threat of that punishment, even though it's speeding, which even though it's a crime, it's a lower level crime, that would obviously put me off wanting to commit anything like that again. Okay, so they either give you a harsh penalty, put you in prison for example, or a really severe community penalty, or we threaten you that in future we will give you that penalty if you continue. The question then, why might the fear of punishment fail in the future? Well, the problem is, when people commit crimes, they don't think that they're going to get caught. So even though threatening you with punishment might work for some people, for those that are often offending and they don't ever think they're going to get caught, that is never going to work, because they're never going to believe that they're going to get caught. So that's a definite no-no there. Also, sometimes crimes are committed as a spur of the moment, and then when they are committed, the person is intoxicated. So they could have had a lot to drink, or drugs, or a mix of the two. So again, threatening you in future is not going to work, because when you're drunk, you don't care, right? That's not what's going to be on your mind when you've had 10 pints. What's going to be on your mind is the crime that you're trying to commit. So for those variety of reasons, the fear of punishment isn't going to work, because either you don't think you're going to get caught anyway, or you're under the influence of alcohol, so it's never going to work, or you're going to commit a crime in a spur of the moment when nobody really thinks about it. But that's the aim of the game there. So individual deterrence, you're trying to put me off. You're just trying to put that one particular person off committing that crime again. Okay? Whereas general deterrence, the aim of this one is to try and put society off committing that particular crime again. Okay? So it could be a particular crime that is harsh and it's being committed in our area. So let's say with Pontefract, for example, it could be that suddenly we have a massive spree of shop robberies. Okay, just before closing, 4:30, 4:45, and in town centre, once a day for the next week, there's loads of robberies going on, and it's occurring. So what we're trying to do is put society off, so put everybody off committing that crime, not just you. If we turn over, we can see how we can achieve that. Okay. Right, so in terms of putting society off, the first thing we can do then is pass an exemplary sentence. And this is if the crime has increased, basically. We've got a lot of that particular crime. Or we can pass a severe penalty, so a sentence that's harsher than the tariff would actually be. So if you want to put an example in here, we did this a few years ago. When mobile phone theft was first on the increase, we decided to impose custodial sentences for it. Okay, which is quite harsh. So that's what we decided to do, impose a prison sentence for anybody that decided to commit that crime. R versus Witten then, so this was a guy that had been convicted of football hooliganism. So like organised fights and things at football games, that's what it's all about. And when people are drunk, they'll get really, really violent with each other. So, in order to try and put society off, we actually gave him a life sentence for that crime. Now, obviously, football hooliganism is quite serious because you can put people's lives at risk when you are fighting at football games, but nowhere would it ever justify a life sentence. So this was given, this severe penalty was given in order to stop everybody else doing the same thing at football games, because they would turn around and think, oh crap, I don't want to get that sort of crime, that sort of punishment, therefore I better not do it. Alternatively then, so we've got exemplary sentence, severe sentence, or we can give a minimum sentence for particular crimes. So if you want to fill in your example here at the side, so for example, 2 severe offences will result in you receiving a life sentence. So 2 severe or indictable offences will result in you serving life. Okay. Right, R versus Turner then. So he did commit 2 serious crimes, which is why it did result in him getting a life sentence. So he'd served a manslaughter sentence, and then over 30 years later, he actually committed GBH. Now, manslaughter is an indictable crime and GBH is an indictable crime. So when he committed the GBH, that meant that even though there was a 30-year gap, well, 33 years, he had actually committed 2 serious indictable offences. So he automatically then received that life sentence because of it. Okay, so 2 serious crimes equates to a life sentence, and that's what he done. Manslaughter, over 30 years later, he then committed the GBH. Well, unfortunately, that's the sort of thing that we did, impose a minimum sentence, and that still applies today. What is an exemplary sentence then? Well, exemplary sentences are given when the crime is on the increase. So we make an example of you. Clues in the title there, really. So we make an example of you so that you won't commit it again, but also nobody else will commit that crime again. And that's the whole aim of the game there, really, to make sure that the crime is not going to be on the increase. Okay. Right, the second way that we reduce crime then is rehabilitation. So deterrence is the first way to reduce crime. The second is rehabilitation. So we're trying to reform you and make you think that you are not an offender anymore, make you feel that you are better than that and that you can change your ways and not just stay in prison for the rest of your life, basically. So they aim to educate and train offenders so that you don't reoffend, and it's designed to improve your self-worth. So you realise that you are worth more than a prison cell. Shows you how to lead an alternative life, but rehabilitation is not really going to work for people that are persistent offenders. So if you are a repeat offender, you've got 2, 3, 4 criminal convictions behind you, probably this is not the thing that the judge is going to look at when he's trying to work out whether to try to rehabilitate you rather than to punish you. It uses individualised sentences rather than tariff. So rather than just basing it on what the tariff is, what we'll do is we'll make that sentence to match you, because then it's less chance that you are going to reoffend at the end of the day. Okay, so that's the aim of the game there, to individualise it so that then it meets your needs so that you're more likely to follow that instead of reoffending. It is important for young offenders, so if you're a young offender and you've only got maybe 1 previous conviction, we are still going to look at rehabilitating you. Question there then, what sentence do we use? So these are all aims, but this wants to know if we want to rehabilitate, what sentence is best. If you want to fill in there, the best one would be a community order. The reason being, community orders are individualised and we can make them match what we feel that you need as a particular offender there. So it works better for you. Right, so that's rehabilitation then, trying to make you think differently, not think like an offender. The third aim then is to protect the public. So we want the public to be protected. Okay. Now, what we do then is we limit your ability to commit future crimes, and it's known as incapacitation. If you want to fill next to it here, then what we mean by incapacitation, it's locking you up basically, so it's making you incapable of committing crimes. So making the defendant incapable of committing crimes. Okay, right, so there's 2 ways we do this. We either make it physically impossible by locking you up, putting you in prison, or if it's less serious, we restrict your freedom rather than taking it away, and that's the difference between the 2. Okay, so we either remove your freedom entirely or we restrict your freedom. So we'll maybe give you a bit like a curfew, and maybe giving you a bit of a tag so you can't go certain places. So that's how we'll do it. We'll either make it impossible by putting you in prison, or we'll restrict your freedom instead. Okay. Winkler's another example of a football hooligan. So he was convicted of the same crime, but he wasn't given a life sentence. What happened here then is we restricted his movement, so we stopped him from being able to go to football games, and he wasn't allowed within the local area when there was a match on, so he wasn't allowed in the city centre when there was a match on for up to 6 years. So it allowed us then to restrict his freedom. Okay, so protection of the public is quite an important aim. If we feel that you're dangerous, but the public obviously do need protecting from you, so the judge has to take that aim into account. Final aim of sentencing then is reparation. So this is all about giving back. So you can give back to the victim, you can give back to society. So giving back to the victim, you might pay some compensation. If the crime involves like stealing something, we might make you give that back. Whereas society, we make you give back by making you do unpaid work. So we can make you do a community order and have an unpaid work attachment to that. And then you're paying back to society because you're doing the work within the community. Alright, so it's known as restorative justice, and it's all about giving back. That's the aim of the game there, to give back to the victim or to give back to society. Okay. Right, you need to make sure you include all 4 aims in depth then to make sure you get these marks. So judges look at all of these when deciding on your appropriate sentence. Okay, now sometimes it might only be one that's relevant, it might be 2, it could even be all of them, but they need to sit and take this into account before they decide the sentence that you are going to receive. Okay, because for example, if the sentence is likely to carry a light sentence, like 1 year in prison maybe, but then you're a little bit dangerous, then we need to protect the public as well. So we've got to kind of balance public protection, but also making sure that you are given the right amount of prison time that you are needing. Okay. Right, so that's your aims of sentencing. And then Criminal Justice Act 2003, punishment, reduction of crime, protection of the public and reparation. Okay, all need to be included to get full marks, and ideally try to remember one of those 3 cases.